So, what questions do you have up there in your mind, or thoughts that keep reappearing in your head? Because today is our day that you get to pick what we talk about. So, whatever your questions are what we're going to be focused on. So welcome. I am Charmaine Tanner. I'm the host of this weekly show and also a parent, a retired teacher, a full-time advocate, and I'm the author of this Amazon bestseller, The Art of Advocacy, A Parent's Guide to a Collaborative IEP Process. The one question that I recently had was from a parent in an unknown state, an unnamed state. And she was asking me because the director, the director had talked to the mother and said, the related service provider really isn't sure how to be effective with your child. There hasn't been good success with all the distance learning. Would you agree to just suspending the related service supports that your child is supposed to get until we get back to school? And it was like, I don't think so. So I just wonder, I don't know if other families are being asked to suspend, to agree not to have services provided during distance learning. So let me know. The district, the short answer, right, is the district is responsible for providing your child a FAPE, a free appropriate public education. That is still the expectation. That is still the law, even during distance learning. And yes, we're going to work with the district, but saying that none of your child's related service time would be provided is not something I think that you would want to agree with. And what I tell parents is that there are alternatives. There are, if a related service provider doesn't feel like they have the skills set that they need to work with your child, then there can be training provided. So writing training in the IEP could be one alternative. The second alternative, depending on where you live, is you could have the school district contract with a private related service provider that does have the skill set that can work successfully during distance learning with your child. Or sometimes what happens as far as a third choice is that sometimes the districts will agree to pay the parent a certain amount of money or write the checks to the private provider. So there's different ways that can happen, but we really need to have the expectation that our children are going to get what's written on their IEP. And yes, there might be a little bit of allowance because of distance learning, but we're not going to consent to no related services. Let's see. Laura says that her district has asked to go to mediation. So are you asking, is that a good idea? Should I do this? The nice thing I think about either facilitated IEP meetings, mediation, there's no cost to the district and there's no cost to the family. So the facilitator, the mediator, they are usually paid by the State Department of Education, but there's no, fee on your part to go to mediation. However, after saying that, I think for something that's as formal as mediation, you do want to have either an experienced advocate with you who has been to other mediation meetings, or sometimes you might even look at having an attorney, because at mediation, if you do come up with an agreement, it's written at usually right there at the mediation meeting, and after both parties sign it, it becomes a legally binding agreement. And so you have to be really careful what you agree to, right? So yeah, let me know if you have a specific question. I think, we always hope that we can resolve things at the IEP table, and the reality is sometimes that just doesn't happen. The other question I would have, Laura, is if you've tried having a facilitated IEP meeting with a trained facilitator. If I have families that are, asking about mediation, one of the first things that I would like them to try is having a facilitated IEP meeting first. Sometimes you might not resolve all the issues, but you could resolve some of them. And then some of the ones where there's more kind of hard disagreement, you might leave that to the mediation process. All of that is helpful to really try before you go to the very expensive legal route of being involved in due process. So Laura, let me know if that helped or not. She said, what can one do if the accommodations from FAPE are not used in math, and therefore student doesn't make progress towards his academic goals? Student has dyslexia, dyscalculia, and is 4 grades behind academically. Thank you. So I was hoping Tamara would be here because I'm not sure what the PLEPA is. I'm wondering if that's an alternative test or something. She says, what can I do if the accommodations from the PLEPA are not being used in math? So I would, I think the first thing that we always need to do is go back to the IEP, Tamara, and check it and see exactly how the wording is in there. So if your child has some accommodations written for standardized tests, like, state testing, usually most states will say if you're going to use that accommodation on the assessment, you also have to have been using it in the classroom. Like I know in Colorado, it's been like at least 90 days before the state assessment, you have to have been using the accommodations in the class. So it depends on if you're talking about testing accommodations, and assuming if it's written on the testing accommodations, it also happens in the classroom. And I think we know assuming things doesn't get us very far. So I would check in also the accommodations section of the IEP and see if those same testing accommodations are written in there for the, more of the curricular, the classroom situations. The other problem with most accommodations is they are so general that they can be interpreted lots of different ways, which doesn't help us, because if the classroom teacher interprets, preferential seating by, oh, he needs to be seated up at the front, where the special ed teacher is saying, oh, he needs preferential seating because it really bothers him if there's people and kids behind him, so he needs to sit at the back of the class. Well, the special ed teacher had this one picture in mind when she said preferential seating, and the classroom teacher had a whole different interpretation. So the best thing to do is to be proactive, and when you're at IEP meetings is to be more specific. So I like to kind of think of the phrase so if it says preferential seating, and then I think so that the student isn't distracted by the doorway. So preferential seating is away from the doorway. Preferential seating so that he can see the board clearly and the teacher teaches from that one board. So we want more specific information in the accommodations. But Tamara, what you could do is check your copy, or if you don't have one, ask the school for a copy of your child's IEP. When they, are not being successful, to me, right, that's our red flag that something needs to change. And sometimes you can accomplish that by calling an IEP meeting and going over those accommodations. So there was another situation, and I posted it in the comments, and so yes, this was a good one. So this was a parent saying, well, I had suggested some accommodations for my son, and the teachers at the IEP meeting said, oh no, we do that for everybody. We don't have to write that in the IEP. It's best practice. Our school does that for everybody. And so then as a parent, it goes, oh, okay, well, I guess everybody gets that. That's okay. But if you have your advocate hat on, and I have to figure out what would be a good hat for an advocate to wear, I don't know, under construction. But if you put your advocate hat on, if it's not written in the IEP, it doesn't exist. You can't hold the district, the school, the teacher accountable for providing it. And so even though I've been a teacher, and I know that a lot of teachers really do, especially with Universal Design for Learning, have a much more, positive culture of choice and options for kids in their classroom, which helps all the kids. But if there's something that teacher is doing that is helping your child be successful, and it's considered an accommodation because your child needs that in order to be successful for not only his IEP goals, but successful in general ed, then you want that written on your IEP. And usually I get pushback, and I think people feel insulted or something that I say, well, we still want that in writing. And I'll put this in the links or in the comments if you want this, let me know. This is a copy of a letter from the Federal Department of Education. And these are just letters that come out when citizens, teachers, parents, whoever, administrators, lawyers, ask questions to the U.S. Department of Ed. You will get a written response. Now, you might have to wait 6 months or so, but you do get responses. So these letters, even though it's not like, this, they quote the law in there, but they consider, the U.S. Department of Ed always tells people this is just a letter of guidance. But when it comes from the Department of Ed, when they quote the IDEA statute, I think we can say this is probably what we should be doing. So this is the letter to Chambers, and this is from 2012, so 8 years ago, but it's an oldie but a goodie. So let me share a couple things here. But anyway, in the letter to Chambers, what I love is not only does it give a definition of what special education is, as far as specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of your child. And they quote, like I said, the statute. Of course, we've had court cases that help kind of clarify that. But the other part that they have in this letter on the back is like my favorite part. So when I would go to IEP meetings in person, I like to have this with me, but now I'm doing virtual meetings, so I can just have it on my computer. But let me read to you, because I just love this. And the question was, what about people say, well, these are best teaching practices. We don't have to write this in the IEP. So the Federal Department of Ed says the fact that some of those services may also be considered best teaching practices or part of the district's regular education program does not preclude those services from meeting the definition of special education or related services and being included in the child's IEP, even if that instruction is being provided to other children with or without disabilities in the child's classroom, grade, or building. So, and it's not that I want to like pull things out and, say, oh, yeah, well, look at this. Though there's probably been times that I've done that when I haven't been as nice. But you want to be able to have something defensible. So when you say, I understand that's best practice, that's exciting that all the teachers are using that. So let's just write it in the IEP. You never know if we move, if we get new teachers. I think it just would really be helpful if we had that written in the IEP. So you don't have to go legal and ballistic unless you get lots of pushback. But you can just be nice about it and say, great, I'm glad you do it. Let's just write that in the IEP and we'll all be sure that will be happening. So that would be my suggestion if you run into that. So Lissa, she says, right, I ran into that when my son transferred schools one year. The teacher was accommodating outside of what was written in the IEP, but then when we moved, it wasn't written. So it was much more difficult to ask for that accommodation. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Lissa, because that's true. And even if you don't think you're going to move, sometimes it's a staff transfer or a staff that, for various reasons has to, leave their position in the middle of the year or something. You want things written down. You want it to be specific enough so that everybody will be on the same page.